Can you please call the hearing number for the record?
This is hearing number 28 of Wednesday, 13 November 2019, in case 005 Khaled Ball, case 0022 Olivia Vincent, case 057 Claudette Albert, case 0079 Jean-Marc Foster, and case 148 Adjournment.
Thank you. And can you please call the next witness?
Mrs. Christianne Belmont.
Henriette. Oh, I can say Henriette, but when I say Henriette, but when I said that last time, everyone said it was wrong. No. Afternoon.
Mon Christianne Belmont. Mon Christianne Belmont. Mon fait serment. Mon fait serment. Pour dire toute la vérité. Dire la vérité. Qui bon Dieu va aimer. Qui bon Dieu va aimer.
Thank you, Mrs. Belmont. Thank you for appearing before the Commission today. And I do believe you got very late notice to do so. Yeah, last night around 5 o'clock. My apologies for that. The letter had been written last week. We do have a lot of letters. The driver is constantly driving around, but we should put in a system where we mark them in priority, so my apologies. We should have done that with your letter because most of the ones we're sending out now are for January and February, so my apologies for that. We called you because you were named as a witness, I hope, in the case of Mr. Edwin Henriette, as the person leading a meeting at the IDC in 1988 that was inquiring into malpractices related to the time Mr. Henriette was standing in as the manager of the, is it Desroches Island, while the permanent manager was on leave. And he claims that he was unfairly accused of being irresponsible and incompetent while not being given the opportunity to discuss what he considered to be the main issue of concern, that money was going missing on workers' salaries. And according to him, he became so frustrated that he left the meeting and was subsequently sacked without any final payment settled to this day. So the Commission would be grateful for any recollections or evidence you can give us in relation to this matter. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
30 years ago, I can't I know he left the employment. If, as he says, he was sacked, it must have been according to the Employment Act. But I don't remember anything, because I left my job around 15 to 20 years ago. 30 years back, this is gone. So I don't remember anything.
I mean, I appreciate it's a long time ago, and
Yes.
unless there was something significant, you know,
Yes.
to remember. I mean, you don't remember. You don't remember, right? I mean, I can't remember what I was doing 30 years ago, so I can't, you know, say you must remember. If you don't remember, you don't remember.
Yeah. So you don't remember anything about this meeting that he
Not really.
mentioned?
I've had so many meetings, so
Yes.
I can't remember. It's 30 years ago.
Mm. Yeah.
But you remember him being employed and then
Yes.
not being employed at
This
some
I
point.
remember.
Yeah.
He was employed and then he left.
Do you remember anything about his employment? Was he a good employer?
As I say, I would not remember these things.
Would there be records at IDC that we could ask for?
I wouldn't know because I left
about
my employment 20 years ago, so I wouldn't know what is happening there.
Yeah. What was your position then?
I was the director for administration at that time when I left.
Okay. And I suppose, the same
Yes.
as when Mr. Edwin was told, that same period. He mentioned this meeting happened in 1988.
88, but I left around in the 90s. I don't even remember when I left the job because I left it behind me and I carried
Yes.
on. So
But
I don't
you had
remember.
that same position?
Yes, I was working as a director for administration.
Administration.
You don't remember any fraud that went on with respect to the salaries of workers at all at IDC?
As I say, I've dealt with so many cases. I will not be able to remember one specific case.
So-
That's 30 years back.
Yeah. So were there cases of fraud that happened?
Not really.
Thank you so much for coming.
Okay, thank you
and
very much.
for telling us what you could. My apologies again that you were given such late notice, and we really appreciate that you came here with that very late notice, even though you knew you couldn't be of much help. We're very grateful to you, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye. So the Commission had called Mr. Didier Confait in the case of 0022 Olivia Vincent concerning the death of her brother, Mr. Simon Charles Denis. Mrs. Vincent had filed a statement before the Commission in which she claimed that Mr. Confait was present with her family in the morgue on October 21, 1982, and assisted in placing Simon's body in the coffin. Mr. Confait, who resides outside of the Seychelles, has provided a statement to the Commission, and I will now read that statement for the record. I would just like to warn that it's quite a graphic statement when it comes to his description of putting the body in the coffin. So I don't think if there's children should be watching. Thank you. So this is the statement of Mr. Didier Confait. I have known the late Simon Denis since 1979. I did not know him personally at first, but then I got to know him through my best friend, Mr. Regis Juniorville. Together, they led the student demonstration against the NYS in 1979. Simon became a cause célèbre after the demonstration. He was very popular among his many friends, especially among the ladies. He was also a great artist. He would go to people's houses and do portraits and also murals. People admired him so much and they paid him for his art. Then he became great friends with Mr. Alton Artem, who later infamously disappeared. They used to frequent a place in Lodge Street called the Honey Pot Club. At the time, we had all become members of the underground group, the Movement pour la Resistance, MPR. Nobody recruited us. It was just the natural thing to do, as we were Democrats and loved our country. There was no free elections under the Rene regime. Even gathering as a group was forbidden. All the independent newspapers had been closed down. We felt we had to do something. We started receiving audio cassettes, newsletters, and leaflets from different sources. We also created our own material, which we distributed. When most of the resistance leaders were arrested and later deported, it became harder to receive material, but we still received some through people who had fax machines. The fax machine was still in its infancy then. Not too many people had access to them. Most of the big hotels had them, and some sympathetic staff who received them subsequently passed them on to us, and we made copies. As time wore on, we started getting attention from the many spies the government had employed. They started following us everywhere we went. There was a police officer called Joachim Antoine who made it his personal crusade to follow Simon everywhere he went and reported on his movements. Over the years, we decided that a friend of ours, who was the chief postmaster, was a spy for the government and was reporting our movements to his police friends. We decided to stay away from him and to avoid him at all costs. Simone then left the Seychelles for South Africa. His departure was hush-hush. We thought he had emigrated for good because of the scrutiny that he was being put under. He eventually reappeared out of nowhere and told us he had been to South Africa to meet with the MPR leadership. He told us that the postmaster is on our side and that he was going to facilitate the underground materials through the post for us. We were totally gobsmacked. We told Simon that this guy was a spy for the regime and that he was going to get us all killed. Simone had told us that he had been assured by the leadership that this person would be working for us. One of our friends, who lived at Cascade, was so infuriated by the information that he left the MPR for good. 3 or 4 weeks later, we were playing billiards in a place called The Barrel. We went back to the Honey Pot at around 10:30 p.m. As we approached the place, Simon stopped by us. He was in his father's car. He asked if we had any cigarettes. I gave him my packet of Benson and Hedges, which is almost a full packet. He told us he was going on a mission. I asked him if he wanted me to accompany him. He said no. He had to go there by himself. He didn't tell us where. I went to sleep and forgot about it. The next day when I was at work, someone told me that Simone had been killed together with another white man. Immediately as I heard the news, I thought it was our friend, Regis Duneville, who had been killed with Simon because they were always together and had been together since the students' demo in 1979. Later on, I heard that Simon was killed with someone called Mike Asher. I'd never heard of the name Mike Asher before that day. As you can imagine, we were quite shocked and filled with trepidation. Later on that day, they carried his burnt-out car on a lorry as if to display what they had done to him. They dumped the car at a police training centre at Pete, Paris, in full view for every vehicle that went past. The next day or so, we went to the mortuary to gather Simon's remains. We saw 2 burnt bodies when we got there. We recognised Simon by his thighs because he was stocky and well-muscled. Mike's body was laid out on a concrete slab next to Simon's. It was very evident that both of these boys had been butchered before they were set on fire. Simon had no feet and no head. Out of his throat there was a wire and a hook, the likes used by deep-sea fishermen. It seemed they had used that hook to pull out his tongue. The 2 bodies had been put into black plastic bags. In 2 pails on the floor, we found their hearts, livers, spleens, and lungs. We had to somehow put the bodies in the coffins as best we could. Each time we tipped the bodies over, the burnt juices from their bodies spilled on us. We then had to take the innards in the pails and tip them each in a coffin. The smell was horrendous. I could not eat any sort of steak for a long time after that experience. It is clear that these 2 men had endured the most terrible torture. We found one hand with only 3 fingers attached to it, still white and obvious that it had been chopped off by an axe. We then took Simon's coffin to his father's house. The next day we held the funeral. There was a service at the Immaculate Conception Cathedral, and later we buried him at the Mount Fleury Cemetery. There was a large crowd of SPPF stalwarts and lackeys at the church and the cemetery, haranguing and heckling us. They had known that there was an MPR movement, but they did not know who we were. Now they knew. A year and a half later, another of our friends, Alton Artem, a great ally of Simone, was made to disappear. The movement then dispersed. Some of us went to England, some to Australia, some to Canada and France. I am still in England to this day, 35 years later. That's the end of the statement. So I thank Mr. Confait for providing that statement to the Commission. And we repeat the calls we have been making for anyone with information concerning the murder of Simon Denis, or the disappearance and probably murder of Hussein Ali, and any of the other victims, to please come forward and give what information you can to the Commission. It's time that the families were given closure and that they're given the details of what happened to their loved ones. Thank you. We will now adjourn and we will resume at 9 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you.
All rise.